fishies? Yeah, cool, cool, cool. All right, well, that's real good. Um, Basically, we're gonna try to get through amphibians today, which I think we can probably do. It's not terribly long, to tell you the honest truth. So if you have any questions, just raise your hand and let me know. And sorry, I'm kind of squinty, but it does let me come outside where my kiddos can sleep. Kiddo, one takes a nap, the other two are old enough they don't have to nap. All right. At any rate, last time we were together, right at the end, we were kind of going through fins. I told you it'd make more sense with a diagram. And normally we put a little more emphasis on fish fins because you do a dissection and you name them and you label them and that kind of stuff. And this year, as sad as it makes me, we will not be doing that. But, you know, if you go fishing this summer, you'll be prepared. So I told you the diagram would really make this just a whole lot easier. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of these major organ systems. And really the way this guy's getting around is primarily the caudal fin. This guy right here, caudal means tail. You can call it a tail fin if you like, but that's the propeller, if you will, that really powers this fish around. Not all fish have this fin. Some do, some don't. A lot of trout do, other fish don't. It's called adipose fin, sometimes called posterior dorsal. Does anybody already know the word adipose by chance? You know what adipose fin means? I've seen no hands. It means fat. That fin is made of fat, and it's kind of cool because fish can kind of steer with it or steer without it. It's a little bonus fin, and it's kind of a neat thing because in the Alaska fisheries where they're hatching out salmon, they will cut the adipose fin off of every single baby salmon they release in a river, and they're releasing just thousands and thousands of them. So 3, 4, 5 years later, when the salmon's coming back up the creek, the anglers know when they catch them, if they've got an adipose fin, that's a wild salmon. If they do not have an adipose fin, that's a hatchery salmon. Still, I mean, he spent his life in the ocean. He swam back to the river. Technically, he's wild as any of them, but he was produced in a hatchery. So that's kind of a cool deal. Dorsal is probably the one you know the best because of the movie Jaws. You know, they show the dorsal fin come out of the water and no. Oh no. So that's a dorsal fin. Everybody knows that. Um, the anal fin, let's see, in fish, like right here, you have a little tiny hole called a urogenital pore. It's not unlike the cloaca of birds, and you basically have one body opening for laying eggs, defecation, urination, and the like. And so the anal fin, surprise, surprise, is near the anus. No duh. These are ventral fins, meaning fins on the belly side, and these guys are pectoral fins. So if a fish could do a push-up, which most of them can't, he would be working out his pecs, right? Making his chest muscle strong. So right next to what would be his chest or thoracic cavity or thorax, but they don't have diaphragm either, so you can't really say thoracic cavity. That's where your pectoral fins are. Now, some added bonuses, since we've got it here, might as well talk about it. This structure here is really cool. If you've ever caught a fish or seen a fish or skinned a fish or whatever, there's probably a skinny little stripe of scales runs right down their side. It's a different color from all the other scales, and that's called a lateral line. Anybody want to guess what a lateral line might do? Going once, going twice? No guesses? That's all right. A lateral line is actually lined with nerves, and it allows that fish to sense pressure changes in the water. And this is a really handy trick for a couple of reasons. If the fish is a predator, vibrations in the water, like little fish swimming, baby ducks, whatever, those things kick off a lot of vibration. And then, supper's this way. If you're a little fish, oftentimes you'll avoid predation by doing what's called schooling. Get up in a little tight ball of fish, a little school of fish, and you all move together. And if you got a school of 200 fish, then you have a 1 in 200 odds of being eaten. And that's not bad unless you're, by yourself, you got a 1 in 1 odd of being eaten. So when you're in a school of fish, basically if one fish turns to the left, this fishy here feels less vibration on his left side, and he's going to turn to the left, which turns the other fish to the left. And essentially they can keep the same distance from each other and kind of school up like that. So that's a really cool trick for smaller fish like sardines and stuff that are prey for a lot of other animals. There's an eye. No duh, you're 16 years old. If you don't know what an eye is, shame on you. You probably know what an eye is. There's a mouth. That's how he gets food in. No duh. Here's a structure called an operculum. That's a cool structure, probably one you don't know. Operculum is basically a gill plate, hard plate on the side of that fish's face. Um, Gills are like lungs. In a sense, they do the same job. They exchange oxygen and carbon dioxide with the atmosphere. One second. Sorry, I gotta clear my throat here. Now, your lungs are protected by a rib cage and muscles because lungs are very soft tissues. And if they were to be damaged by, trying to catch a football and missing or something like that, or getting caught on a tree branch while you're hiking, you would be in a world of hurt. It's the same thing with the fish. Their gills are hanging right off the side of their face. And if they were to get caught on a branch or twig underwater, they'd be bleeding out like crazy. So the operculum is to the gill as the ribs are to our lungs. It's a protective covering that keeps the gill safe. A gill in water is very neutrally buoyant and filamentous, has a massive surface area. You take that fish out of land, gravity pushes the operculum shut, the gill deflates, and they are no longer breathing. But you can see them try. You get a fish on shore, they'll buccal pump. It's where the fish takes his mouth and just open, close, open, close. They're trying to force water through their mouth, but they can't because they're in the back of your truck. But basically, if a fish is swimming, water's flowing across the gills, respiration's doing great. If a fish is holding still, he can still get water to flow across his gills by opening and closing his mouth. Buccal pumping. That's kind of a cool structure. All right, so what else we want to know about fish? Some other cool thing about fish, they have overlapping scales. They're going to have about the same number of scales when they're born that they have when they die. And the scales just kind of grow with them. Oh, hold on. Dawn, do we need to know this for the test? Dawn, you already have your test. You can print it off. It's big picture stuff, so not really. Thomas, it's like a submarine radar. He's referring probably to the lateral line, and yes, it is. Sorry for not checking the chat box earlier, gentlemen. At any rate, basically, if you don't have any wildlife and fishery buddies, you get some. They're kind of cool guys. You can tell how old an elk is more or less by taking its tooth out. They grow rings on those elk teeth. You can tell how old a tree is by cutting it down. There's rings on a tree. Most of God's green earth's critters will grow faster in the summer than they will in the winter because there is more food in the summer than there is in the winter. Unless you're a polar bear, then that is flipped because you have sea ice and baby seals in the winter and starvation in the summer. But all the other critters, including actually humans, will grow faster in the summer than they will in the winter because there's more abundant food. So fish scales are the same thing. You get these rings appearing in a scale. A wide ring, that fish grew a lot before he ran out of food. The close rings, he's growing real slow because it's winter. And so you can figure most fish are going to be born in spring or summer. That's year one. You can pull one scale, throw it under a dissecting microscope, and have a pretty good count of how old that fish is. So works for elk teeth, works for fish, does not work for people. We don't really grow rings like that to my knowledge. Some fish have a lot of mucus covering their scales. Mucus, even though I'm clearing my throat right now, and I wish there wasn't quite so much of it, does a lot of good things. Number one, if fish are a little bit slimy, it decreases the resistance in the water. There is water resistance for these swimming critters, so having mucus on them kind of lubricates their travel through the water. The other thing that mucus does is it resists parasites. Fish have parasites just like, any other animal has a mosquito or a tick or a flea. There's all sorts of little insects and leeches and things of that nature that want to wedge in between fish scales, parasitize that fish. So good covering of mucus on their body will keep those animals from doing that. And so mucus is very advantageous in that respect as well. Now, the other cool thing about mucus, which is a little gross, but I think it's cool, if you've ever caught a northern pike, nasty snake of a fish, but if you ever caught one, they get real stressed out. You can watch the mucus come out of their scales. It is gross. Throw them in the bottom of the boat and watch them. When you first grab them, they're rough to the touch. Throw them in the bottom of the boat and give them 2 minutes, and you can watch the mucus seep out between their scales, and they're a little more slippery. So if you pick them up and you don't handle them real well, maybe they got a chance of getting away. Maybe that's the reason, maybe not. But as far as slimy fish, holy moly, our northern pike a good example of that. So the other cool thing about fish scales is almost all fish exhibit what's called counter shading. A lot of animals exhibit counter shading if you start to think about it. Counter shading is the idea that you're darker on the top and you're lighter on the bottom. So if the osprey is looking down into the dark lake, he sees a dark blue or green lake with moss, and he sees the top of a fish that's dark blue or gray or green. Now, if a big predator is coming up underneath you to eat you as a baby fish, he sees the white sunlight and clouds, and he sees your white belly. Make sense? You kind of more or less blend in. Now, deer are colored in the same manner, white on the belly and brown on the top. But I know of no predator coming up underneath the deer. I think it's so their baby fawns can find them easier, but what do I know? Lots of critters are counter shaded. Um, even in the summer, I'm counter shaded. The top of me is brown, the bottom of me is very white. But that doesn't do much for predators. There's counter shading on a northern pike. You see he's got these little white speckles. If you ever like snorkel, scuba dive, whatever, when the sunlight comes through the moss, it sends these little pin spots of sunlight. And so those guys in moss beds just do a wonderful job, and they're white on the bottom. And so that's a good example of that. And here you got, a couple of sharks. What are you trying to do? Trying to get an even tan because they're dark blue on the top and they're light colored on the bottom. That's counter shading. It does a good job. Makes for a dumb joke, but as long as you get counter shading, I don't particularly care. Digestive system in fish is going to be pretty straightforward. Fish will eat anything they can get in their mouths: algae, plankton, worms, bugs. Trying to think of the weirdest things I've seen in a fish's stomach: crawdad, tree bark, baby duck, full-grown duck. Anything they can eat. If they'll fit it in their mouth, they'll eat it. Mice. It's one of my favorite fly fishing flies, catching largemouth bass with a mouse. Man, that's fun. Frogs. You get the idea. Other fish. Oh my goodness. Is that a hand up? Nope, it's not. It's just Taya's little sister wiggling around. We're good. I thought we had a hand up. Sorry, guys. All right. They have a mouth. No duh. The mouth, you're good. You're good, Mariah. Don't worry about it. Leads to a pharynx. The pharynx is the tube that's going to lead to their esophagus. This is a lot like yours, honestly. Mouth, pharynx, esophagus right there, all the way down to your stomach. So, honestly, their digestive system starts off a lot like yours, minus their teeth sometimes their tongues have weird little pokey things that face backwards so prey can't escape. So, mouth to pharynx to esophagus to stomach. It's a design you've seen before. Now, from the stomach, they dump into an intestine. Here's where we're going to get a whole lot different. Your digestive system has a pancreas, liver, gallbladder. What else we got? Small intestine, large intestine, all kinds of stuff. Fish have a liver. Fish have a small intestine, but they don't have a large intestine. They got a little bitty coiled small intestine straight to the anus and out into the body. Your large intestine primarily is going to reabsorb water. Okay? Fish don't need to reabsorb water. It's not like they have a shortage of water to drink. They live in water. So there's no need to reabsorb water. If your poo is runny and you're a fish, so what? You'll just be drinking it later. Let the poo be runny. And that's kind of the way it works. Their intestine ends at the anus. Probably no big surprise there. You saw that in earthworms, right? So a one-way digestive system. Respiration occurs underneath the operculum is their gills. You probably already knew that. The gill arch is like a white, tough cartilage ring. And then the filaments are the soft, red, squishy parts. The water passes over the gills pull oxygen out of the water, and they are incredibly, ridiculously, amazingly efficient. 95% of the available oxygen in water can be extracted by a fish, depending on the fish. If trout don't have very oxygen-rich water, they will die. If you put a catfish in a lukewarm mud puddle that's an inch deep, it will probably live. Okay, so it it depends on the species. You can throw perch in the back of your truck, drive for 40 minutes, and dump them into a different lake if you want. Throw a wet towel on them. Those things just they won't die. I feel bad because when I fillet them, I'm like, you should be dead by now. I'm a terrible person. So it depends on the fish, but that's that kind of stuff. Now you guys think I'm sick in the head probably for cleaning fish. Hopefully not. Fishing's fun. You should do it. Circulatory and nervous systems. Well, their circulatory system's pretty straightforward. They have a four-chambered heart, much like you and I, two atria on the top, two ventricles on the bottom. One ventricle pumps blood to the gills, much like your left, check that, right ventricle pumps blood to your lungs. Then the left ventricle pumps blood throughout the fish's whole body, much like your left ventricle pumps blood throughout your entire body. So it's a really good design. The four-chambered heart we've already talked about and how it's awesome because it doesn't let oxygenated and deoxygenated blood get all mixed up and lose that efficiency. And hey, when you're extracting, 95% of available water, you don't want to oxygen from the water. You don't want to waste it. Like your gills are doing an awesome job. They need to be working with an awesome heart. And man, they sure are. Fish have very large olfactory bulbs, very large in their brain. Fish can smell incredibly well. That's how salmon find their way back to their home river. They don't go and look up every river and say, does that look like home? They can smell. I mean, in like the fraction of parts per million, they can smell and find their way home. So as far as the nervous system is concerned, they do have a very good sense of smell. Most have a very good sense of vision, but there is a lot of diversity in how fish get food. Some are mostly dependent upon smell, some are mostly dependent upon vision, so it kind of depends. The lateral line we've already talked about. It's essentially a nervous system of this fish, feeling vibrations in the water, which is good for getting away from predators, good for finding food, good for chasing a spinner, etc., etc. All right, fish reproduction's primarily their egg laying. You probably already knew this. Mom lays the eggs, dad fertilizes them with milk. Some are good parents, some kind of ditch. It depends. And the eggs hatch and out swims the baby fish called fry, F-R-Y. That's the name of a baby fish. Weird. Anyways, let's see. Spawning is a season where the females are laying eggs. Male covers the eggs in milk. The eggs become embryos. They consume the yolk in an egg, just like a chicken, just like us. Humans are born with quite a small yolk, but it gets the job going until the placenta is established. And then when it's a baby fish, most of the time, it swims off and fends for itself, or is eaten by a larger fish. Very rarely do fish hang around to carry the babies around and be super involved parents in the fish world. They just kind of swim away. But there's always the exception to the rule, right? Okay, for a dissection. I don't like seeing that slide. We're not doing a dissection. Okay. Anyways, if you did a dissection, you'd basically take a fish, you'd cut right behind his gill, and you would cut right beside his anus, and then you would gut him like this from anus to throat and open him up like a creepy book. And when you opened up the book, you would see all of these weird organs. And here you have them. Tour of the fish. Here's the fish's teeny tiny brain, which massive amounts are dedicated to smell and vision. And that's pretty much what he's dedicated to. Fish do not have a great sense of taste. Most of the stuff they eat doesn't taste that good anyway. There are gills behind those. The gill filaments are the part that are actually respiring. Then, right underneath the gills are the heart. This says atrium and ventricle, but if you just throw it together and know that the heart's right beside the gills, good enough for me. Food goes into the mouth and through the esophagus. That's this guy. It then enters this large bag called the stomach, where it's mixed with lots of digestive enzymes. The food travels down the intestine, which is kind of a design you've already seen, and exits at the anus, which is kind of a design you've already seen. Here the fish has a gonad. You can tell if they're male or female because the females will sometimes in the early summer be filled with eggs. Like, holy cow, so many eggs in one fish. And I always feel extra guilty when I gut a fish and all the eggs come out because I'm like, oh, that's like 1,000 fish that could have been in the lake that I just took out. Dang it. But fish are super hard to sex. So you don't really know if it's a male or female when you catch it. You're just like, well, good enough for the frying pan. I guess we're going to keep it. And you see all the eggs and you're like, darn it, I'm so sorry. Anyways, if it's not a girl, this will be a quite small white strand that runs up towards the air bladder. Then it's a male. So anyways, that's a gonad. The gonad leads to the urogenital pore, which is one hole for urine, feces, and eggs and sperm, depending on if it's a male or a female. Now, up here we have the air bladder, an organ we've already talked about. They can inflate or deflate this as they see fit based on how they want to keep their buoyancy in the water. 8 feet deep and 100 feet deep are very different densities and pressures, and fish can regulate that, which is quite cool. We've already talked about the fins. We've already talked about the lateral line, but here's the weird part. This guy right here is the kidney. What a weird thing. It runs all the way along the back to the anus, essentially. It's so weird. Such a weird design. But the kidneys filter the blood. Yours are paired organs. They're about that big, and they sit retroperitoneal in your mid to upper back. And those are your kidneys. Cortland, do you have a question, or is that just a comfortable way to sit? She's shaking her head no. Fantastic. Okay, so kidneys. Oh, yeah. If you've ever gutted a trout, you like take all the guts out and you're like, cool, I think we're done. And then like if you look inside, like right at the back, there's like this black stuff everywhere along the vertebrae. There's so much black stuff. And you're like, man, do I cut that out or do I just like fill it with butter and eat it? I don't really know what's going on. That's the kidney. Try to cut it out. It's all partially filtered blood. But, whatever. Do what you want. Anyways, now you know a fish kidney. That's kind of cool, right? All right, that's fish. Whoa, amphibians. Sweet. How are we doing on time? 4 minutes? Boo. I am so sorry. Let's talk about amphibians. You guys know amphibians from when you were young peoples because they're like frogs. And the first lesson in every kindergarten science class is how a tadpole becomes a frog. Okay, so let's talk amphibians for a whopping 4 minutes. Amphibians have a double life, meaning both water and land. And essentially all amphibians, they will start in the water and end on the land. There are exceptions to the rule, namely those who stay in the water. But essentially, we start in the water, we end on the land. Most larvae have gills like fish, just think baby salamanders, and tadpoles. Adults become terrestrial, or at least semi-terrestrial, carnivores. They're eating insects, they're eating worms primarily, and that's going to pretty much feed your salamanders and your frogs, okay? So larvae have skin they can breathe through, gills they can breathe through. Adults grow lungs. How amphibians start with gills and move to lungs is something I will never understand. Almost certainly dictated by a series of Hox genes, but I don't claim to understand that either. It's pretty cool. Pretty big change. Anyways, these guys are primarily doing external fertilization. Most of them are laying eggs. You've probably seen frog eggs if you've been to a creek or a river. They look like a bunch of little black dots in the water. They're normally stuck to a bunch of moss or algae, and those are frog eggs. Most critters don't eat frog eggs because they're not particularly palatable. But tadpoles, on the other hand, those critters will eat. Amphibians have a closed circulatory system. I think pretty much from here on out, everything is a closed circulatory system. It's the most efficient. And all of that endolymph, I'm an insect with my clear blood stuff, we can pretty much say we're not talking about that anymore. And they have a 3-chambered heart. Dang it. So wasteful. 2 atria, 1 ventricle, oxygenated and deoxygenated blood mix. So inefficient. Come on, frog. Step up your game. Anyways, 3-chambered heart. Feel bad for them. Here's the life cycle of a frog. External fertilization. They lay a bunch of eggs near the creek. The eggs all get stuck on this moss stuff. Little tadpoles hatch inside, and you have a tadpole powered by a fin. He has gills. He has essentially the same digestive system he'll have as an adult. His gills become smaller and less useful as his tail degrades. He grows some front limbs and starts to exist in the shallows. His tail shrinks and shrinks as his lungs start to develop. When he grows up into a young frog, his lungs are developed. His gills are completely gone. The tail extending beyond the anus is also essentially gone. And don't get me wrong, he can still swim incredibly well, and he can hold his breath for a freakishly long time, but he's pretty much going to be chilling on land now, or near land. He'll hunt in both water and land. His webbed feet make him a very good swimmer. But you guys all know egg to tadpole, froglet to frog, because that's like middle school science, but that's amphibians. So just, extend the same kind of body plans out to salamanders, and you'll pretty much have the same idea. So larvae live in water, adults live on land, they get more dense bones, they grow lungs, they have ribs that provide some structure and support against gravity. You'll note that fish bones are very small, generally speaking light, flexible. You can snap them between two fingers without any difficulty. The reason for that is that fish are buoyant in the water. If water is holding you up against gravity, you don't need particularly dense bones. If you're an elephant and you weigh a ton and you spend your time on land, you do need particularly dense bones because gravity is pushing down on you with a great, great force. So you ever wondered why fish bones are so small and frail and flexible, but deer bones are so thick and dense and strong? Now you know, living in water makes you weigh less, which I'm sure you probably already knew that. There's a few big groups of salamanders you should know about, amphibians rather. The first is salamanders. I would assume almost everybody in South Dakota has seen a tiger salamander. They live in road ditches and they fall into window wells. Primarily, they used to reproduce in prairie dog holes, but we've killed a lot of prairie dogs, so I think they're still kind of chilling at like Wind Cave in that respect. But yeah, they have long bodies, long tails. They're mostly eating worms and bugs and stuff, and they really need moist woods for a habitat. Being as western South Dakota is primarily semi-arid, maybe you haven't seen them that much, but there's plenty of places in the hills that are quite moist. Frogs and toads both have no tails, essentially. Frogs have long legs and are very good at jumping and leaping, and they stay close to water. Toads have short legs. They are quite slow. They like prairie dog holes as well, and they will be in the dry prairie. No, toads will not give you warts. Warts are a viral infection in your hand that your body will defeat on its own, and the wart will be gone. If you find them unsightly and have this weird desire to freeze them off, then, do what you want. But if you pick up a toad, by all means, wash your hands. But you're not going to have a hand covered in warts from picking up toads. So just so you know, I tend to get that question every year. You guys might have already known that. And then the world's nastiest animal, a Sicilian. Maybe we'll learn something new today. Sicilians are disgusting. They have no legs, they have no eyes, they live pretty much underground. And after mom births her young, she sheds skin and they eat the skin while they're growing. They yuck. They're so gross. They have fish-like scales. They live in moist soil. I've never seen a Sicilian. I don't particularly want to see a Sicilian. If you'd like to check them out on YouTube, there's several videos of them, and they are so nasty. They're just nasty. At any rate, that's a Sicilian, but it's 2:30. So that means we must stop. Does anybody have any questions over fish, amphibians, salamanders, frogs, toads, or Sicilians?